When you listen to the coverage of the Iran war, you notice immediately how one-sided it is. Iran is constantly portrayed as the aggressor, even though, under international law, Iran has every right to defend itself. And this is where an Islamic obligation comes in, one that is almost forgotten today: the obligation to truth. Not only to speak truth, but to seek it, to verify it, and not to sell it just because it's easier. You are obligated to remain just and not become part of a lie, even if that lie is repeated everywhere. Because wars are not fought with weapons alone. They are fought with language, with moral labels, with headlines that try to decide who is good and who is evil before you even ask about causes. And this is exactly how it has worked again and again over the past decades. Bombings were sold as necessity, as protection, as defending values, and anyone who questioned it was quickly labeled naive, dangerous, or on the wrong side. That repeating pattern is the point. This is not about romanticizing any side. It is about recognizing how the world keeps feeding you the same story. We act out of morality. We bring order. We protect. And yet, the aftermath often looks the same. Shattered countries, ruined lives, and a public discourse where hardly anyone is allowed to ask the basic question: what if the narrative itself is the weapon? So this video is not a news recap. It is an Islamic clarification. How do you recognize narratives? How do you protect your heart from manipulation? And how do you remain just when the world trains you to feel justice selectively? If you look honestly at the last decades, you will see a script that barely ever changes. It begins with a moral story. They speak of security, stability, values, freedom. Then comes escalation, bombing, intervention, pressure, almost always wrapped in the same message. We had to act. There was no alternative. And in that story, who is almost always framed as the aggressor? Almost always it is the others. Almost always it is the regime, the threat, the villain. The world is kept inside a simple picture. Here is order, there is chaos. Here are the good ones, there are the bad ones. But the Islamic perspective forces you to look deeper. It doesn't ask who is louder. It asks who started it, who benefits, who controls the interpretation. And above all, is justice really being pursued, or is consent simply being manufactured? Because here is where the danger begins. If you swallow this repeating story without verifying it, you eventually stop asking about causes. You start reacting only to keywords. You get used to the framing. You unconsciously accept that violence can be moral, as long as it comes from the right side. At that point, morality is no longer morality. It becomes a costume, put on when convenient. Now look at Iran. If a country is attacked, the core logic of law and reason is clear. There is a right to self-defense. But that clarity often gets washed away by flipping the entire sequence. Causes are cut out and only reactions are shown. They speak of escalation while hiding what triggered it. And suddenly, the one reacting is presented as the culprit, while the spark disappears into fog. That is the pattern. And anyone who does not recognize it gets manipulated at the same point in every new conflict. They show you the fire, but they hide who held the match. Which images do you get 10 times a day, and which do you never see? which terms are repeated non-stop, and which suddenly become unspeakable, which background gets explained, and which gets shut down as too complex. And then a mental prison forms, one that doesn't look like a prison at all. You believe you are thinking for yourself, but in reality, you are thinking inside a frame that was built for you. You react to signals. You learn which opinion is safe. You sense which position gets applause. And you start to notice, even if you have doubts inside, you stay quiet, because the cost becomes social. This matters because it explains why so little is even allowed to be debated. Not because people are stupid, but because the atmosphere is engineered so certain questions are not supposed to be asked. Once a narrative is stamped as morally correct, any criticism is quickly labeled immoral, and the debate dies before it begins. And this is exactly where the Islamic obligation becomes essential. The Qur'an trains you not to blindly ride the majority wave. It trains you to be just even when it is uncomfortable. It teaches you that truth does not live where the noise is. And it teaches you not to normalize injustice by dressing it in polished words just because it sounds professional. So if, when it comes to Iran, you notice that reactions are automatically called aggression while causes are barely mentioned, that is not accidental. That is the mechanism. Make reactions visible, make causes invisible. Then millions see a distorted picture and mistake it for reality. That is why you must learn to see differently, not only what is said, but what is systematically not said. Not only the clip, but the history behind it. Not only the label aggression, but the question, who defines that label and why? This is not a hobby for political nerds. It is a matter of faith because it shapes your conscience. Whoever gets used to distorted standards eventually loses the ability to recognize justice at all. We live in a world where the most powerful sell themselves as moral authority, while for decades they have justified one attack after another. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. Every time it was security, values, and necessity. And in the end, it left chaos, destruction, and a country more broken than before. And now we see the same pattern again. An attack hits Iran, but it is sold as if the ones bombing are once again the good guys, and the ones responding are automatically the bad guys. It is the same inversion, just with new headlines. If the Epstein files taught you anything about what kinds of circles sit at the top of power, then do not forget this. We are not being ruled by good intentions. And that is exactly why your duty as a Muslim is not to swallow every narrative, but to seek the truth, to speak it, and to refuse to get used to a lie until it starts sounding normal. Because whoever gets used to lies does not only lose clarity, he loses stance.